Hi, everyone. I'm with Translation Commons, which is a nonprofit community of volunteers that are working on digitizing indigenous languages. And I was really impressed by all of the speakers before me. They really indicate the detail and nuance and complexity of the work that goes into supporting those languages. My talk is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to tell you about what I have done. I'm going to ask you to help solve what I think is a problem. So I don't have a lot of graphics. I'm just going to make some points. I'm going to paint a picture of which you probably know all of the elements. But I want to put together a pattern and then describe what I think is the problem. You with me? Yes. Okay. And I'm going to try and do it in 20 minutes, which may or may not work. We know that digitizing a language has many requirements. It has many stakeholders, many standards, and that we need to conform to, and then we need to get the support of the various technologies. It often takes decades. You measure how long it takes, and if you're lucky, a half a decade, could be 2 decades for many languages. So let's talk about that process, and please join me in trying to come up with ideas on how we can accelerate and scale up language preservation and digitization. So you'll see all sorts of numbers out there about how many languages are going extinct by the end of the century. Here's one number. I've seen that maybe there are more than 8,000 languages, different statistics. Doesn't matter. We're talking about thousands of languages, right? That's the big picture. And of course, if these languages go extinct, I think you probably all know the costs, loss of cultural identity and heritage, knowledge that these communities have that should be shared but isn't being shared. And also, it hurts these communities in that they get marginalized and they don't have a voice to represent their own thoughts on how things should work in the environments they're in. So what do I have to do if I'm an activist and I want to get my language on a digital system? I have to apply to multiple, I'll call them stakeholders, but they're standards group and technology platforms. And I need to find experts that can help me. You've seen some of them here. I know several of you here, you're all experts as well. How does an activist go find these people? How do they contact them and get the help and then get their endorsement to get into a standard? And they also have to do things like prove they have the credentials to represent the language and the language community. And then they have to show supporting data to say this is actually how the language works. You can't just walk in and say, by the way, I've got Klingon here and it works like this, please add it, right? So, or pick your favorite language to represent. There are a number of community challenges. Some of the communities are very small. We said they're near extinct in terms of speakers. Some of them are geographically dispersed. You can't bring the community together. In terms of getting examples of their writing, first of all, if it's a spoken language, that's a separate issue. But they may have lost data. Some of them have gone through forced migrations. They can't carry their materials with them. In some cases, there are privacy concerns. Yes, I have lots of examples of letters that were written between people, but they're good examples of writing. But maybe there are love letters, personal thoughts, information that the individuals that have those letters don't want shared publicly. So they represent examples that maybe can't be used. And then, of course, you don't want just the examples. You have to have some kind of annotation. Who is speaking to who? It can make a difference if it's a senior or an official talking to a junior. Can make a difference, the genders between the people. I think you know all these issues. So We need some annotation to say where was it, what kind of a talk was it, who was speaking, and so forth. And then, as you all know, there can be data sovereignty and governance issues. Communities want to control their data. They're concerned about cultural appropriation. They may be concerned about dilution of their culture if other cultures can come to them and make use of it in some way. Still with me? So, if you're an activist, you know, we sometimes think, we talk about communities and we think, oh, the activist has this team behind him. In most cases, or at least the ones that I'm familiar with, it's one person or maybe two people. And they're working alone, and they may not be a linguist or a technologist. There's someone who wants to represent their community and have their language digitized. And when they go to look to speakers, there may be very few. They may be elderly, hard to work with. They may be spread out. And today, scanning isn't so much of an issue. But where do they store this information? How do they share it? How do they annotate it? What kind of annotations do I need to make? So those are the challenges. So here's some of the stakeholders. I didn't try to list them all, but you have to have a character set defined. You need to have a language tag. You need to have a script code, font, keyboard, encoding represented in Unicode. We could go on, right? This isn't even nearly a complete list. Earlier was mentioned hyphenation and morphology. In fact, Translation Commons is working on an open source morphologizer for Cherokee. We're going to demonstrate that in February. But so there are many others. But these are the key ones. If you want to get your language onto a platform, you have to get some acknowledgement and support and registration to all of these. I won't dwell on this, but you have to show that you have the credentials to represent the language and that the community agrees that you represent them. And then we talked about writing examples, word list, books, letters, whatever you can find, which may or may not exist. And then some information about the community. Where are the speakers located? How many speakers are there? How literate are they? How computer literate are they? Do they have access to digital systems? What's the potential number of users and what's the vitality like? Why is this important? You have to show to the platforms that are going to support that language that it's going to be used and maybe there's a certain commercial element to it. So those questions may also be important. So, an activist says, how do I get my language? You have to apply to all of these different organizations that I listed. How do I do that? What do they need? What do I have to do? Where are these experts? Who are they? How do I contact them? Okay, so I'll show my credentials. How much is sufficient? What is the right kind of endorsement? And how much data is enough, right? So all of these things, an activist, if he starts to get a hint of, okay, this is what I have to do, well, how do I go about that? How much, and in some cases, there isn't an answer to some of these questions. How much is enough can depend on the language and its characteristics and so forth. Experts. How many are there? They're relatively few. And they're, I'll say they're siloed in some sense. Several of you here. Some of you just do fonts. Some of you just do keyboards. Some of you only do Arabic languages. Some of you just do Indic languages. It's not a large community, and we're spread out. And it's not like there's one person who can do the entire job. And most of the ones I work with are volunteers. In some cases, they're supported by a company, but they only have a limited amount of time to stray from their main job in order to do this kind of work. So they're part-time. They can only put in a limited number of hours. That extends the process. And it can be a difficult job. You've seen some of that here, right? It's, you need comprehensive, thorough analysis and research, and it's time consuming. By the way, if several of you are getting paid, talk to me, because I want to know how I can get in on that. Everything I'm doing is volunteer. How many experts do we need? Well, this is the decade of indigenous languages. It ends around 2032. Supposing we wanted to get 3,000 languages done in the 7 years that are left, we have to do 428 languages per year. And how many languages can an expert do in a year? One? Not even, I think. Even if we said, let's make it the end of the century and it was 70 years, that would be 42 languages per year. How are we going to get this done? We can't do it with one language coming to one expert and then another expert and a different standard organization and then another standard organization. So let's have some solutions. Help me out. I want the discussion to be your ideas and how we can contribute. I'll seed a few ideas. Maybe they work, maybe they don't. Maybe a couple of them are controversial. First of all, we need a database of these experts. Some kind of yellow pages so an activist can say, well, I need help with this language and I want keyboard, or I want to get it into Unicode. Yes, I know about the script encoding initiative. Deborah's here. But people need to know where to go and how to make contact and get information. There are some software that support indigenous languages, creating repositories and collecting their samples. They need to be better known, and communities need to know how to find them. And also there can be costs and also some understanding of the technology to make that work. How do we make that easier for people to find and make use of? How to understand what the requirements are. Where can I go to get guidance that says, here's what you need? Now, in Translation Commons, we have a number of papers that provide guidance for different elements, but we don't get so detailed. We say, for Unicode, you make the application here. If you want fonts, this is what you need to provide, and here's who you can go to. We need that more thorough, comprehensive descriptions. So maybe there should be a hub, a central website, something that offers application instructions for all of the stakeholders, so somebody has one place to go and says, all right, I'm at this stage, this is what I want, this is what I need to do. Sorry, this is closing up here. And maybe dashboards to monitor progress and help us identify how we can improve the process further, but also so the activists can understand where they are on some kind of a timeline and what comes next. And this hub would connect community representatives and activists to all of the stakeholders. So you start to have a pipeline. People can, so an organization can say, oh, I see this many languages are at this stage and they're going to be coming to us for support. Let me line up those resources. There's a lot of dependency on experts here. And we need to spread the wealth. It can't be all experts. Now, you saw some great work today where people were saying, all right, I've thought really hard about this language and I've come up with a typeface for it, or I have a keyboard and here are the principles I'm applying. Supposing, not those individuals specifically, but we had an expert community that was available to say, give us the language, we'll outline what needs to be done, but we're not going to do the implementation. There are other people who are skilled enough, they can follow a specification and create the font, create the keyboard. So that's one idea. The idea of a Sherpa is someone who says, all right, I understand all of these standards bodies. a community activist can come to me, I'll work with them. I speak the language of the standards groups, I know their requirements, and I can explain to the activist what they need, and I can help them with that process without actually being the expert who's going to just say, well, all right, I can help you with the font, but then you have to find somebody else for a keyboard, right? You with me? I hope you're coming up with your own ideas. All right, so we need to train more experts, or at least people who can do some of the work, training programs or reaching out to students. We also could be training community members, because if many of the communities have connections with other similar communities, and if we provide training in one community, and if those individuals may also be able to help other communities afterwards. So, as I mentioned, we need to remove dependencies on the experts. There are also, I think, some of the work today indicated, oh, I see a pattern here in how Latin languages work, maybe other languages as well. Can we create some kind of template that says, all right, if you're working with Latin scripts, here's how you fill out a keyboard, or here's the kind of things you would do for the font. Same thing for Indic languages or other languages. I think we're not taking advantage. We've done a lot of languages now. We should be able to identify patterns and somehow make use of them, and then create templates. The other thing is that there's a limitation in experimentation, right? I can't get my keyboard into a messaging app if it's not using standard, following the standards. It doesn't have a font, it doesn't have a keyboard, it doesn't have a way to represent characters in Unicode. Yeah, how do we get over that hump? How do we prove that the language would be used? We need some kind of a sandbox. And here what I'm thinking is maybe we make use of private language tags, the private use area in Unicode, and we build some keyboards that cater to it, but make it easy to migrate if they get adopted to the standard. But then people can offer that messaging app, and the community can start to use it, and also they get to see where they might need improvements or where they're missing things and so forth. Whoops, sorry. And then we define some best practices around that to make it easy to migrate. There is no talk these days that makes proposals that doesn't say, oh yeah, by the way, AI. So AI. I think for things like certainly keyboard layouts, I think there ought to be a way to take a tool that says, here are the possibilities, here are the language requirements, here are the characters, map it onto the different spaces that are available with the different keyboard types, generate at least the prototype, and take it from there. The same thing, I'm not familiar with fonts so much, maybe there's something we can do there, but also AI could be used to kind of be an automated Sherpa, as I called it, to help people navigate the process, get the guidance, ask questions and get answers. So if not AI, at least we could be thinking about something like that. Does that make sense? Maybe a little bit more radical idea. As experts, we are thorough and detailed, and I saw a lot of respect for nuance in getting fonts and other things exactly right, comprehensive. But maybe that's not the best way to go forward for some of these communities. Maybe something a little bit more approximate gets them going and then get tweaked later. If there's an opportunity for some kind of phased releases, including getting their characters encoded and the like. I expect that idea to be challenged a little bit, but I want to put it out there. How am I doing? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Perfect. So, we also need to keep in mind, this is not a solution, it's more of a challenge. Whatever solutions we adopt, at some point, let's say we were to add 3,000 languages, to our support. How do we get that onto a cell phone so somebody can just say, I'm changing language, right? And the platforms that host those systems, they're going to limit what they can provide. So we need to make sure that our solutions minimize resource utilization, minimize the space they take up and the performance, just to make sure that we can maximize what the different platforms support on devices like cell phones and the like. So I'll stop there, and I hope you'll all come back with your own ideas. Feel free to reject some of these, but thank you all.